This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. Hey, this is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life, a show where we talk with some of the most creative writers, artists, musicians, designers, entrepreneurs, and academics. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with entrepreneur James Schramko, and we're going to be talking about being a contrarian, the idea of syndicating your content, and owning the sweet spot and partnering the weak spot. So let's get into the show. Hey, it's James Taylor here, and I'm excited today to have a wonderful entrepreneur, James Schramko. James is an Australian creative entrepreneur who's all about scalability and leveraging the work you do. He has built, grown, and exited from a number of successful online businesses, and today helps others to do the same. He is a master of outsourcing and content creation using virtual teams, and it's my great pleasure to welcome him to the show today. So, James, welcome to the show.
G'day, James. Great to be here.
So, share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Well, it's summer here in Sydney, and there's a lot of surfing happening. It's sort of, we're into 2 surf days here at the moment, and in between that, I do a little bit of business, which I do online, so I do it at my own pace, and I'm kind of the only person in my home office here over in Australia, which is pretty cruisy.
And so you seem to have this great blend of lifestyle and the work that you do as well. So you said you work from home on your own, but you've built this great virtual team or virtual teams in the kind of work that you do as well.
Yeah, I'm really a fan of lifestyle design, and I think that we have a lot of ability to control that if we make good choices. And I've certainly been through the complete transition from being a labourer, wheeling wheelbarrows of bricks after cleaning them, to having traditional office jobs and then working my way up through management, and then eventually casting that aside to take on my own business. And now some of the things we hear about online businesses are actually true, in that you can have a leveraged effect where things are working while you're not. And also you can take advantage of things like geo arbitrage, where you can hire labour in one country and sell it in another market for a profit. And if you're good at managing people and building systems, you can set these things up so that you can manage remotely, and you literally can work your own schedule from wherever you want. And the main things, of course, you just need connectivity to the internet from time to time. And it just gives you a completely different lifestyle than what most people are going through on a day-to-day basis.
And how did you first learn your craft as an entrepreneur? How did it kind of get started from that, moving from a time of being a worker bee to actually building and growing your own business?
I think you have to shed a lot of the things that you're taught and trained from an early age. So it's about being inquisitive and curious. Reading a lot of books helped me. I read well over 1,000 books in my adolescence, and it started to make me think about the way that society's set up, and the way that some people zag while everyone else is zigging, so to speak. And I experimented, and some of the skills that I learned really paid off, especially selling. It's one of the greatest skills to learn, to let you sort of bust out of the capped income scenario. At least in a sales role, I was able to earn more based on my efforts, and the better I was able to sell, the more that I could earn. So I learnt this relationship between results not being proportionate to the exact hours you work. And as soon as I was able to sort of test that out, then I was able to look at other things. And in fact, some of my best clients at Mercedes-Benz were fantastic teachers. They were billionaires, entrepreneurs, business owners, and they had unconventional ways of looking at life. And I was very curious about how that happened, and I asked them questions, and they often shared great information and resources. And then I actually applied the things that they were talking about, and that was one of the big differences between a theoretical knowledge and getting an actual result, is you actually have to implement things.
And as an entrepreneur, you're constantly coming up with new ideas for whether it's individual businesses or products within that or services within that business as well. I know you have a number of online courses and there's the coaching programs that you've built as well. Where do some of these ideas come from? If you're let's say if you're thinking about one of a recent online course that you've maybe created, where did those ideas often germinate from, and how do you go about developing those ideas?
Well, each month in my Superfast business community, I conduct a live training. So for practical purposes, my most recent information product is once a month. And what I do is I have a templated slide deck that covers the 5 or 6 main topics that all of my members are interested in. So I start with a market need, and then I reflect on what sort of problems and challenges they're having based on the questions they're asking in our forum. And I can see what some people have answered, and I can also form my own viewpoints, and I can in some cases actually go and research things as well, and I can use my team to help me with that. And then I'll compile a structured training based on what my market's problems are and how I can solve them. So the short answer is every product and service that I've ever created is based around a market's need, not just my creative desire to come up with a great idea and then feel a big egotistical rush that I could go out to the market and sell this. It's way easier to start with the market and then to find products and solutions that fit that market than it is to come up with a product or a solution and then go and find the market.
I mean, that's such an important distinction that you just said there, James. I mean, it's that thing of I when I'm coaching with artists or authors sometimes, and that thing of for a music artist, if they're going to be planning on building their touring career, actually going out and asking and speaking with promoters first before they put together a touring concept or a touring project. And there was a classic thing around with authors where I think it was in the 50s where they used to an author would put out an advert for something for 4 different books, and he would only end up writing the book that ended up he was getting the most feedback from to actually kind of go and write. So he was kind of testing the idea before he actually ever created the product.
Well, there's a subtle thing there. I would advise against asking people because they honestly don't know how to answer questions unless you're very skilled at asking questions. You will often get a preference versus performance bias. So people will say one thing but then not act accordingly. So I don't ask people. I just observe and I see what are people asking me? Okay. What are people doing already that I can do better? Because that's going to be a far greater situation. And the first product that I had success with online was selling software that builds websites as an affiliate. And that simply means I was able to make a commission for every time that I could recommend someone this software. But I started with my own need there. I needed to build a website. I found it really challenging. I tried all the different solutions in the marketplace. Some were really bad, some were okay, and one was really good. And all I needed to do was document my own process on the basis that other people must be going through the same situation. And my theory was proven correct when people did actually respond to that and they said, hey, this is really good, this solution that you're recommending. We appreciate all the time and effort you've put into showing us why it's a good solution. And they could relate to my story of pain about the solutions I tried and why they weren't good. And then I actually created a complimentary bonus that people could claim if they purchased through my link. And that would help them get better results with this software than if they'd purchased it without this bonus. And people really liked that. And now I had customers. And once I had customers who had spent $200 on some software, they would start asking me other questions, like how to hook up an email system, or how do I rank my website better in Google, or how do I do this, how do I do that? So that seed of a question is a good clue as to what sort of solutions to create that people would find value in, rather than me ever having to go out and say, hey, what would you buy if I were to create it? I think that's very dangerous to do.
And then you mentioned at the top of the show you had this transition between being a kind of labourer to being an entrepreneur. Talk about, what was the kernel of wanting to make that change? Was it something that you had a burning desire to do, or was it something that circumstances meant that you just felt, I've got to do this? And then how did you actually move from the position of being a labourer to being an entrepreneur?
There were a lot of things along the way, but one thing was I became very aware that having a job is about the most dangerous thing you can do, especially if you combine that with the other dangerous thing, having debt. So I've got 4 kids, so I was supporting 6 people. I had a mortgage on my primary property that I lived in, and I had an investment property, which was quite a common thing to do in Australia, at least, to negatively gear a property as an investment. And I also had some shares which were geared, and this was all stuff that my accountant suggested so that I don't have to pay so much tax. The trouble is, once you're on that debt hamster wheel, you need a big income to service that, which I had. However, it's being paid to me by one company. Pretty much one boss was in control of that relationship, and I became acutely aware that this was a dangerous scenario. And at the time, at sort of my peak of the career, where I was a general manager on around about a $300,000 salary, I noticed that in the US there was a subprime lending fallout, and I could see this nasty ripple about to come across the rest of the world. And I became quite nervous about that. And I realized that instead what I needed to do was I needed to get paid by hundreds or thousands of different people so that I could protect my income from being single source dependent. So that sort of was kind of like the stick of dynamite with the fuse burning that I was worried about might explode. I also had a childhood situation where when I was about 18, my parents came upon financial hardship, and that sort of drove me to not want to be in that situation as well. So I didn't want to repeat the cycle for my kids. I don't blame my parents. It happened, and it's a fact. And, with one of the very strong emotional drivers for me was I didn't want to tell my kids, hey, we've got no money, we have to move out of the house. I just didn't want to be in that situation because it happened to me, and it was kind of hard to take at the time. And then there were these other things where, I was getting really confident with my own ability, and a lot of my clients started offering me equity in their business and partnerships and things. They were always trying to get me to change from what I was doing to getting on board with them because they recognized that I had good skills. And of course, I just kept reading good material that pretty much laid out the path. One of the books in particular, the last chapter of the book, pretty much recommends writing down who you want to work for and approaching them. And that was a real revelation. It's like, hey, you can actually control the future and be responsible for your own income. And that was probably one of the most entrepreneurial things that I'd read. And, I started to build up some courage to do that. So the second part of your question is I set a trigger point. My goal was to create a business outside of my employment that earned me $300,000 a year. It took me about 2.5 years to do that by purchasing a laptop and learning how to build a website, and eventually finding out how I could make affiliate income selling this software. And then a couple of trips to the US, I really started to benchmark with some successful entrepreneurs who were making a lot more money than I was. And I paid attention to what they were doing. And I came back with some ideas on how I might increase my income quickly. And about 6 weeks later, from my second trip to the US, I quit my job because I was able to go past that trigger point. But I'd certainly recommend, if someone's in a position that I was, where they have debt and a family to support, you don't just quit your job on the hope that you're going to make your online business or your artistic endeavor or your next book the thing, because you're going to put so much pressure on yourself that you're going to reduce your chance of success.
And you're a big fan as well of kind of continuity or residuals, rather than just making the sale once as well. And so I believe you've kind of built that into a number of your businesses.
Absolutely. I focus on activities that have leveraged payoffs. And one of the things that I learnt that a lot of salespeople never learn is that my best customer is the one I've already got. And I built up within 2 years, 50% of my sales were repeat and referral sales in the car industry. And that's a fairly long sales cycle and a fairly high priced product. But focusing on those relationships allowed me to mine out the families and contacts and relatives. So this repeat referral business was good. In the online world, it's much easier to focus on subscriptions. So I built an SEO service business based around subscriptions. I built coaching models. Both of them are on recurring subscriptions. And I built a website development business that was partially on subscription. And I've since sold the 2 service businesses very recently. And the ones that I have left are both recurring subscription. And it provides you stability of income, predictable cash flow, confidence with the ability to hire your team members and market. You can sleep well at night because you're not worried about putting food on the table next month.
I mean, and that really speaks to, the 1,000 fan idea that someone like Chris Kelly wrote about, where, for a lot of creatives as well, it just takes 1,000 people who are really into what you do to be able to support you and help you have a career doing what you do. And continuity, subscription, residuals, from those folks is a big part of that as well. So James, tell us about a time in your life where you worked on a project, you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason it just didn't work out like you'd hoped. And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Well, I've tried a few different iterations of service businesses over the years. There's one that I've tried maybe 6 different ways, and it's a service that's in demand. People say they want it. They even sign up for it sometimes and pay for it, but then they can't deliver the materials that you need to be able to complete the project properly, or there's a lot of people undercutting it on price, or someone finds a friend of a friend who does it cheaper or back of house. It's a really hard business to scale because it's so customized and it's ahead of its time. It will be a big service in years from now. So I think I went a bit early on it, and I didn't stick to, I didn't just stick to the thing that we're doing really, really well with. And I wanted to create that next leapfrog position, but it didn't quite stick. And I think sometimes you're just too early. It's like if at this time in the beginning of 2016, a lot of the oracles of the web are saying, you've got to get on Snapchat. It just seems way too early from my perspective for most marketers to be doing that. So I think if you're familiar with that marketing curve where there's the early adapters and then the early majority and then the late majority and then the laggards, I like to focus in that early majority part of the bell curve where there's a substantial market. The pioneers already have the arrows in the back, and that's really the lesson for me. It's just to stick with the fat part of the bell curve and not trying to get into things too early, because you will burn up resource and maybe not make the end of the runway. And of course, you don't want to be the last one in the market. Most of the profit and the excitement's gone by that time.
And can you tell us about a time in your life when you had some kind of insight or light bulb moment, that point in your life where you had that kind of aha moment, just, okay, this is the path I need to go on, and this is maybe a decision I need to make, and I need to kind of zag when everyone else is zigging. Is an experience like that in your life?
James, I get those pretty much every day. I would be what you call a contrarian. Do a lot of different things to your average person in the online space. They're all talking about launches.
Because online it does seem to be quite a pack animal world where a lot of people
it is a pack animal world,
the same thing, the break shiny thing syndrome.
Like learning a new language, most people won't ever know, they can't even speak it. Like there's such a high failure rate because there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of hope marketing. There's no real qualifications for someone to sell a course. It's very easy for people to come into the market. Really, they don't even need a domain name these days. They can literally do it from Facebook. You can come into the market and purport to have an expertise. But a lot of people, I think, are teaching the wrong things, and they have big flocks following, and they just go around from someone's list to another person's list, spending $2,000 each time at the table and never getting a result until their credit card's maxed out, and then they go off and get a factory worker's job, 2 years later in defeat. And I think that's sad. So, I'm constantly doing things differently to the rest of the market. I hold a lot of things to be true that other people don't know yet, to take a comment from Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel, yeah.
And I think that it's my purpose is really to cause people to think and question things. And a lot of the contrarian approach that I've got came to me through previous bosses and customers. So I've been fortunate that I was in a really good breeding ground to learn these skills and to be able to perpetuate them.
So one of the things you teach, which I find very interesting, is this be everywhere idea. And in terms of how you both generate the content that you're creating, but also how you kind of break it up and really leverage that content that you're creating. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's going to be very useful for a lot of our listeners who usually creating the initial content is not the issue, but it's then thinking about how you best leverage that.
Yeah, maybe a small correction there. Pat Flynn's the be everywhere guy, and it is a mistake as well. With resources, you just can't be everywhere. You've got to be in the right place. So there's definitely things that you should leverage, and there's no point making a good piece of content and then no one finds it. So I do think you should syndicate that and repurpose it. So what we do as our core is we're aware that people have different preferences for their modality. In other words, some people like to read, other people like to listen, some people like to watch. So if we ever do a video, we'll engage the people who like to view, but we'll also strip out the audio and make that available to them as a podcast, and we'll also transcribe every single word of our podcast. So on superfastbusiness.com, it's fully transcribed. And the same inside my membership, every piece of content, every live training, every event recording is fully transcribed and turned into a nice PDF, because some people prefer to read in that medium. So when it comes to publishing our podcast or putting that transcription on our site, then I will make sure we share that in the most relevant places. So over a few years, I've been able to work out where my audience is. And they're not really on Pinterest, and they're not really in LinkedIn. They're most definitely on Facebook and Twitter. So they're the two places that I do focus on.
And they move the needle for you. Your business.
They move the needle for my audience, and it's going to be different. I imagine artists will be taking advantage of Instagram, and they may very well be Snapchat, at least in the future. In the past, they might have been on MySpace. But you've got to think about what's relevant for your audience. If you're in a business-to-business market or an enterprise market, then you probably want to take advantage of LinkedIn. So there'll be a few places that have a big return, and then there'll be many places that have a very little return, which is why Be Everywhere is completely flawed.
And then you now kind of give great advice and coaching to other entrepreneurs, but what is the best advice that you've ever received about being an entrepreneur?
Question everything.
Question everything. And is that you instill that within the entrepreneurs that you coach as well now?
Definitely. I provoke thought. I ask people why. I'm curious. I don't let people off the hook with a simple answer. I want to know why they came to that conclusion. What caused them to think that? What else have they tried? Have they just blindly accepted something, or have they tried something, the exact opposite in some cases will get a better result? There's a lot of people around there espousing wonderful myths like ending price in sevens, read headlines, sell more. To be successful, you have to do big product launches. You've got to have affiliates. A lot of things that I know don't necessarily have to happen have just become convention. And I say, why is it convention? Why are you ending your prices in 7? And they'll say, sevens get a better conversion. I'm like, really? According to whom? Show us the stats. What else have you tried? Let's have a look at Amazon.com. Isn't that interesting? They have $79. A lot of their prices end in 9s. What do they know that we're not trying, since they're a pretty big e-commerce store? And I like to provoke thought. It doesn't make me super popular sometimes. However, we get a little closer to the truth when we go through that process. And the guy that pushed it into my head was a very difficult man, actually. And he was super contrarian and ended up getting in a lot of trouble all the time. So I think you have to draw the line, and if you're going to engage in brinkmanship, it's good not to be kamikaze suicidal about it. You should know when to pull back and not cross the line. and that's part of the thing. But I just don't accept things blindly, and there's a lot of people in the business space are just super gullible. They never question anything, especially if they're going to pay someone for advice. They don't ask for reviews. They don't check into their background. They don't even Google to get some information. They don't ask for previous participants' results. They just go into it with blind hope and accept everything, and often they meet with failure, and it's not surprising.
And do you talk about the kind of bright, shiny thing syndrome, which I think a lot of creatives suffer from, but maybe as much as entrepreneurs, and whatever the new tool is of that particular time is a big thing. So my question is kind of goes along with that a little bit, I guess. But is there any kind of online resources or tools that you really love, but also you think that genuinely work as well? They work time and time again, and you would be willing to say to someone, actually, I think this is a good tool worth trying out.
Yeah, I've actually created an entire post on my recommended page, which is all the tools I use in my business. And that's a good starting point, because a lot of my audience trust me. And they figure that if I'm using a tool, that I've researched it, that I think it's a good tool, I've compared it to other things. And for the most part, I'm not the first one to rush out and get a new tool for the same reason we talked about before, being too early in the market. If you change to a new tool and it doesn't turn out to be supported, or it doesn't do everything you want, it can actually cause you a big step back. So I tend to be a bit, I'm probably in the late majority with tools. I'm not interested in adding more shiny objects. My goal actually is to have less things. And that's what I help students with. I say, let's have a look at everything you've got. And much like someone who's got 10 years worth of crap in their cupboard, we'll throw a lot of it out. We'll say, you don't need this. You don't need that. Why have you got this? You don't need that either. In fact, all you need is this, and it's not even that good. Let's get you the new version of that, and that's all you need. So most people come away with some weight coming off their shoulders. I only have one computer now and one iPhone 6, so I've got the least devices that I've had at any time. And now I use Facebook for about an hour and a half a week. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask for what's the latest, greatest tool. But there are certainly some tools that people in my business would get a lot of value from. For me, where I have a virtual team, I find Slack is an amazing tool.
Yeah, it's a great tool. And that's interesting, because what you just mentioned there, I find very common, especially as creatives develop and become better and better and stronger and often become very successful as well, is the actual number of tools that they use decreases. And they tend to focus on doing fewer things better, or using fewer things but better as well. So that's interesting. You said that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them wear black skivvies. They cut down their options in their wardrobe so they can focus more of their energy into their pen or paintbrush. And I think creatives, especially artists, they're always going to struggle with emotional decisions, because selling is basically emotional, and they're probably more sensitive than analytical type people or architect type people. The more creative someone is, I think the more they could go on any sort of wonderful adventure, and it's their way of living, and it's totally justifiable.
And I suppose that talks a little bit to one of the things that obviously has happened, especially with the music industry and a lot of other industries in the creative industries, is that by the kind of flattening of distribution, where everyone was told you can do everything yourself. And it's absolutely true. You can do everything. You can be your own record label. You can be your own music publisher. But that's not to say whether you should be doing everything yourself. So you've been quite successful in also using these kind of virtual teams and building virtual teams to help leverage what you are obviously very, very good at, which is thinking in different ways about problems that your customers are having.
Oh, you most definitely want to be the conductor of the orchestra, and you don't want to be playing every instrument. So I believe you should own the sweet spot and partner the weak spot. So that means that whatever you're really good at, that's your little spot. If you're very good at singing, then sing. But you probably want to get a good producer and a good label behind you, because You may not be that good at doing those things yourself. Well, you certainly can do everything yourself. It doesn't mean you should do everything yourself. I could build my own website, but I don't. I could actually do my own designs, but I probably shouldn't. I'm not a very good artist at all. So I recognize where I'm strong. And there's two layers to this, and it's kind of counterintuitive. The first step everyone knows is that you delegate the stuff you're not good at, right? That's step one. But the real leverage actually comes from delegating the stuff you are good at. And that's the hardest one to do. And that's where most entrepreneurs are still clutching on. And that's what stops them growing.
And if you could recommend just one record and one book to our listeners, what would they be?
Wow, that's hard. What do they want to learn? The book that's most on the topic that we're talking about, I'd recommend is a Jay Abraham book, Getting Everything You Can Out of All You Got. That was the book that helped me quit my job, and I'm lucky to have met Jay Abraham several times now. And when I had a chance to chat with him for a bit, I asked him what his favourite book is, and he said of all the books he's produced, that's his favourite book as well. It wasn't the biggest seller, but it's still his sweetheart book, so that's good enough for me. You said record.
Yeah,
what's
that? What's the album? What's the record? You're out there hitting the surf, or you're about to kind of go out there, hit the surf, or coming back. What's the record that kind of gets you going?
Oh, it'd be a Led Zeppelin record.
Any particular one?
Led Zeppelin 2.
Awesome. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you kind of have the tools of your trade that you need, that minimum viable selection of tools that you have, and you've obviously got the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but you have no contacts, no list, nothing. How would you restart things?
It sounds a lot like when I had all my stuff stolen in California a few months ago.
Oh, dear.
Came out from the surf and I had nothing, not even a pair of pants. Oh. So I had no phone, no money, no car key, no pants. So it was just underpants, T-shirt and a surfboard, and had to get myself back on track. But it didn't take me too long. By that evening, I had myself an iPad mini that I'd borrowed from a friend of mine, and food and shelter. And by the next day, I was fully firing. I was back in the system, back online, getting the contacts. So it wouldn't take me long to get back on track if I started from scratch, because I take full responsibility for my success. And I've got very solid standard operating procedures that are emblazoned into my head through repetition.
Well, James, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we'll put all the links to all these different books and different things you've mentioned on the show notes at jamestaylor.me. Share the best ways that people can connect with you and learn more about what you're working on.
I'd just say go to superfastbusiness.com. I've got some free training there. There's a profit leverage course, which is 3 parts, and it will encapsulate the way that I think about online business, and it certainly resonates well with everyone who goes through that. It's 100% free.
Well, James, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll let you get back out and hitting the surf and building and growing your businesses. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, James.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.